adaptation to climate change is not going to be generated purely from the scientific or the academic communities. It's going to be a co-learning exercise, a co-generation exercise between practitioners, planners, and the scientific communities. And in that sense, offers us a whole new paradigm of generating new knowledge that is both useful and is good research in its own terms. And I think that's the challenge that people who want to get into this field, either from the scientific community or from the practitioner community, can do to work together. And we don't have good structures of doing that. We don't have good structures within universities of one department, people talking to the other, as Sudeep has said, and we don't have good structures of academics talking to non-academics. We need to find ways of facilitating that. Thank you.
My name is Rob Johnston. I'm from the University of Queensland School of Environmental Management. I guess my question is really about, my question or comment is about local. We hear a lot about local now. I'm one scientist who has struggled to get funding for local. And so I would throw a few eggs in the basket here and say, on the one hand, is it really the science people not wanting to work there, or financier, donors, funding agencies not understanding what local really means, and therefore are scared to fund it? The other question I would pose, or the other point I try to make, is that what do we really mean by local? Because from the talks I did this afternoon, it seems that local means slightly different things to different people. And so I fear committees, and I fear bureaucracy, and I fear therefore working to define things. But I just wonder if somewhere in the middle of this there's not a need to try and really grapple with that issue. What do we mean by local? In a basin, depending on which basin you're talking about, local could mean something as sub 50 kilometres, sub 10 kilometres, or it could be 10,000 square kilometres. So I just think that somewhere in the middle of all of this, there's a need to come back to basics if we want to sort of really tackle the local issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it was one question from Lisa, please.
I'm Ken McClune from ISET, and I'm working with the ACERN Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network. And I had a couple of comments. One was the idea of uncertainty and for decision makers, and the idea of needing to hone down models. I'm a little concerned that feeding this desire for getting rid of uncertainty is preventing sort of transitional change in how decision makers are working with that uncertainty. There's certain limitations, certain physical limits on how we can project future climate. You know, even from the pictures that nice pictures we draw of these linear changes, these are just projections, they're not predictions. And also on the science development field gap. There's, in the past 5-10 years, there's been a lot of work on the side of the science field trying to, you know, wake us up saying, hey, get out there, you know, participate. And but that gap needs to be filled from both directions. And so it was nice to hear that, you know, that there needs to be dialogue between both sides in the field. But I just want to highlight that working out there right now, it feels like there's a lot more energy from the science side. It would be nice to see some energy from the development side to fill that gap.
Thank you. Please.
Yes. Thank you. My name is Tommy. I'm from AIT. I just want to give a comment of Professor Jen Palatikov when she mentioned about end users as a target of the adaptation, adaptive management, actually. So we've been doing the TNA, like Professor Rakshit mentioned before, that in AIT, and most of the time we deal with policymakers. When you mention about end users, actually end users is a very wide spectrum. Are we going to address this to policymakers? Or are we going to address this thing to the affected people? Because both parties will have a different perspective on anything they discuss. Like our colleagues from Bangladesh, when they said that we're going to address things in adaptation in our policy, and then they said it depends on the politicians whether they want to do this or not. So how are we going to do these things in a scientific manner, actually? Thanks.
Professor Krishna, I invite one question more, then a reflection from the panelists. Then we continue with further comments and questions.
I'm Professor Murali Krishna, presently visiting Asian Institute of Technology. Kazua, Ne, and Dr. Rakshit has highlighted one specific point related to adaptation. See, we're talking about the role of science in adaptive development, and you mentioned barriers to adaptation is shortage of data. The basic issue when you're talking about adaptation it has to be site-specific, both in a spatial dimension, also in temporal dimension, also in course of time. So unless the issues related to the data are addressed, data means uncertainty. So once you have a lot of data and data is analyzed, uncertainty, the inbuilt component of uncertainty can be eliminated by having large amount of data. Unless the uncertainty is removed, the adaptation development cannot be realized in a fullest manner. Essentially, that is what is the most important thing. Other thing Professor Jean has mentioned is knowledge is generated which end users cannot understand. What are the end users? See, in all knowledge need not be given to all end users. You have to define what type of knowledge to be given to what type of end user. So if you are talking to a man on the road, what type of knowledge has to be given? A politician, what type of knowledge has to be given? A decision maker, what has to be knowledge? So knowledge can certainly be derived, and the scientific knowledge, what is available in the form of certain scientific reports, can be communicated into a popular language depending upon the level of the person who is going to the end user. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I invite the distinguished panelists for their reflection for this part of the discussions. Please.
I'll just open with a brief comment on the uncertainty issue. Thank you all for comments here. This is a tricky thing because I think one of the things that has made it difficult is that there was a nearly universal expectation that given a few more years or a decade or two, we're going to have a handle on that uncertainty. We've been talking to climate scientists, and they're nowhere near as confident that that's likely to be the case. In fact, we were hearing that as we build more biogeochemical cycles and related phenomenon into the models, there's a real possibility that uncertainty, as defined by the variation in the output of these models at least, might increase. It might be many decades before we see the kind of reduction in uncertainty that will allow us to approach adaptation decision-making with the same confidence, for example, that we, up until fairly recently, were approaching the design of hydrologic or hydraulic infrastructure, the relatively good estimates of what the return periods of key events were and so forth. That may not be in the future. My suspicion is that we're just simply going to have to get better at making good decisions under uncertainty. That's my sense of it. Right.
I just try to stretch Salim's discussion on what is adaptation science. In our institute, we were grappling with the idea of whether to start a new degree course in climate science. And this thought came to my mind: what does make up a climate scientist or a climate mitigation? So the end of the discussion was that at the present juncture, it would be wiser to start a master's degree course in climate science at the master's level, at the graduate level, because we are not yet there, as you say. But I think in the years ahead, in a few years' time, 5 years from now, it might be possible to have what I was trying to stress in my talk, have a transdisciplinary area, which will become a discipline by itself at that time and start at an undergraduate level. You can see a similar analogy with biotechnology when it started. When biotechnology started, there was no undergraduate in biotechnology. It usually used to be a biology person going or an engineer going to do the processing part. But then now you have it in the undergraduate level. So I think that has to evolve. And then you have an integrated course which in my mind would take away the mental blocks which we have at the moment. It's only natural for us to have the mental block. We are trained in a particular way. Because even today, when you go to any scientist, you go to a conference like this, you listen to a person for 5 minutes and you know what is his background. One of the podium person is a water scientist here. You can make out very quickly because he'll talk about models in a particular way. It'll take some time for us to get over those and think the other way around. So if I can, I'm just adding to the discussion.
Please, Professor Jean.
Thank you. Yeah, well, there's a couple of things been said in the questions that I think are interesting reflections on the relationship between scientists and decision makers or policy makers, or, I mean, I call them end users because it's just a convenient catch-all phrase. I could spend 10 minutes trying to list the end users, but it wouldn't really be useful. So use a sort of shorthand. But somebody said, I think that they would like to see more energy from the decision-making side, and someone said that all knowledge shouldn't be given to all end users, that there has to be some kind of process of targeting information at end users. I think we have to, really we do have to shift the place where we stand in dealing with this problem. And I think I'd just like to say again what I said before, that adaptation has to be science in the service of the process, because if it isn't, then the people who are responsible for making decisions around adaptation are not going to have the knowledge that they need. So this process needs to be driven not from the climate science side, it needs to be driven by the needs of the decision makers. And I'm a scientist myself, that's a background I come from, but because of where I work now, I recognize that unless we shift our thought patterns to just put the focus on the end users rather than on the climate change science, we aren't going to make progress with this. And Ron asked a question about what is local. I don't know, Ron, what is the answer to that question?
Thank you. Next question or comment? Please use microphone over here.
My name is Nauraj Khatioda. I'm from Nepal Development Research Institute. I would just like to start with Professor Irando's remarks on this science, policy, and politics by saying that you said, you know, it's because science, policy, and politics, they need very specific knowledge. So it's not so easy to communicate the climate change stuff. And I would also like to, you know, agree with what Professor Yaswara said, that this climate-related development is not given a priority against the contemporary development, and the reason could be what Professor Jean has said, that because the knowledge is generated at a level where it is not understandable by common people or even the politician. So there is no common language because it's a very complex thing. And I'm working for climate change related project for the last 6 months, and I still find difficulty in understanding adaptive development, resilient development, and climate proofing. So it's not so easy to communicate. Kindly permit me, I'd just like to share one incident with you. 3 months back, I was invited to give a talk to a group of audience comprised of 35 female members of the parliament. You know that we have a big parliament in Nepal now. So I mean, they have very little or no educational background, you know. And the topic given to me was impact of climate change and economic development in the context of Nepal. And when I reached the seminar hall, the organizers told me that the audience was not happy with the previous speakers, and then because they presented in a very complex way their lecture, and the audience nearly chased away the speakers, you know. So I was in a very difficult situation, but I managed because thanks to AIT, I'm an AIT graduate because of that. Now the point here is, so it is, I think that I agree with you that this, you know, we are not, I think we scientists or engineers, we are not being able to translate the generated knowledge in a very simplified way. And Professor Mori is here. In Japan, I think you are very good in translating it's a very complicated thing to simple, you think, way, because I stayed there for some time. Now my question is, in